when it comes to your question, Susan, that was quite interesting because that was one of the first points that we actually were discussing. And I had an opportunity as a PhD student to talk with the senior researchers. I think it was a very good combination. Because for me, some of the important learnings from this lecture, that even though we have some differences in the historical backgrounds to the manifestations of inclusions today in the preschool, I think we also in Sweden, or still I can, and many of the preschool teachers I meet now during my education, I think we also in Sweden have resources and beliefs influence the fulfillment of inclusion in a qualitative way, because we have the policies, we have the regulations, but that is not enough. And yes, there comes recommended practices in. So.
Someone else?
Someone else? Volunteering? You? Yeah.
Hi, Lisen from working here as a researcher and teacher, and actually studied at the UW before. So we talked about, or I thought about, and we talked about the difficulty and amount of work that has been invested and gone into this work of. That's amazing, and the systematically with which it's been performed, and that it takes that amount of work to bridge this research practice gap, and that people have been writing about and talking about for ages. I wrote a piece about that when I was studying in Seattle 12 years ago. So it's still going on, and we talked about that in Sweden, and you have also had experiences from another countries. So we're still working on that. And for people that are working on a daily basis with children, they want these lists of things to do, and with detailed descriptions. And I've been thinking about this since I heard you last time speak here at the Stockholm University, that it's much also needed for the area of speech, language, and communication, where we still are struggling to come to actual practices or how to do things in practice. And so, but also on another note, another reflection is that for me there are differences in the system. So in the States you have speech pathologist, or some in the UK they say therapist. You have physiotherapists, you have occupational therapists within the school district, and that's not the case usually here in Sweden. Although speech language pathologists are now starting to go into that field, and there are more and more positions opening up. And I think some occupational therapists, maybe, not quite sure, but it's a big difference. And there are two totally different systems that are like a wall in between, and it's difficult to collaborate. You have the municipalities, and then you have the landstings, health sector that's running the more with the OTs, PTs, and the SLPs. So that's a big difference.
Hi, I'm Emily Kremer-Wollrath from the National Institute of Special Needs and Education and Schools. So I used to work at the department, and I wrote my thesis here of sign language and how this was acquired by very young children. So I find it was very interesting to find out how you build up this organization to make the recommended best practice, because I think we need really to take care of the practice, and we are trying at the institute at the moment to make some documentation about how we work and why we do that, so that we can deliver this for the coming people working at our institute. So I find that interesting, how to build up an organization for that. And I think also that a lot of our materials that we develop and use is collaborating with this.
Actually, I have a question from my reflections, and it's about the focus, if it's some difference between the States and Sweden. I come from the same place, and we are talking a lot about the environment to get access to the social, the physical, and the pedagogical environment, and that it should be förutsättningar för lärande. How do you say? Preconditions for learning, and I think that's very similar to what you are talking about, but I think the focus could be some difference between the States and Sweden. That you talk a lot about the child's own training and how to what do you say, coping, to cope with yourself, how you should get help to help yourself, and we have a lot of focus on the environment, how we can make it accessible. Is it something that I got wrong, or could it be? What do you think? I'm not supposed to ask. That's my reflection. That's my reflection. Okay. No, that's my reflection. Is it or is it not? And the best practices, I can see it's confirming the solid base that we have, and we have other bases, the same thing, that you need to look at the leadership, you need to look at the environment, and the collaboration with different parts and the families are so essential, and that is it's good to hear from another solid research. The same makes me feel stronger. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for the lecture. I don't have any experience at all about research or practice when it comes to preschool, so this is just a reflection about the older ages. How about the older ages? What you are describing about the welcoming classroom, about the things, how to continue this in school, because that's an issue, really, and I would like you to hear something more about that later on when you reflect on what we said, because I'm very curious about that. Thank you.
My reflection was that you said that most people, I guess parents and so on, are positive, have a positive view upon inclusion. And as a psychologist from the Child and Adolescents Psychiatric Unit in Stockholm, this is not my experience. I experienced that most parents with children with very special needs, they say they have some, not anxiety, but they have, I don't know the English word, they might be a bit worried about that there are no special schools anymore, and how can we send our kid with so special needs to a usual school and he or she will not get what he or she needs. And quite often you would hear the same reflections from parents of typically developing children, but that might be the older ages as well, that they say that why would this kid be in my kid's school where it will slow down the learning process of all the children and so on and so on. And I don't know if this is just my personal reflection or if this is the general view in Sweden. It was just something I was thinking about.
Yeah,
first one reflection to you then, Erika. We had this question or reflection the first time, or in the 1947, we had the same argument in a way. So that's something from the historical view that we have been working a lot to have this inclusion perspective. But we know all those different kind of needs, of course. So we struggle with that. We still struggle with that. The other reflection I had also is about, we were talking a little about that before. Do you say matrix or tables? Matrix. So my reflection is that from my research work and from my teaching work here at the teaching special educators and preschool teachers too, is that we have a lot of good practical people, and we learn a lot about inclusion, and we learn a lot about special education and needs and so on. But the systematical work is difficult just now to learn about. And just a short example from last week, from a teacher in the school. He was here. He's here as a student. He's going to be a special educator, and he said that he struggled with that. He has 2 assistants in his classroom because he is a teacher in with students with special needs. All the students have special needs. And he has difficult to manage all those levels that Susan was telling us about, and to, as I understand him, know about those different kind of levels from himself, and also the knowledge of from the assistants. It's difficult to work together. And to understand what this kind of knowledge can mean in a classroom or in a preschool room, for example. So the systematical work to come to from the quality level until to the individual level at the same time. Not you will do that, you will do that, you will do that. It's always on the same time, but as you also said, that one of the most important things is the planning time. So we were also discussing that, of course. And you all know here that the preschool teachers, they have nearly no planning time at all, because they have to be with the children from 7 o'clock in the morning until the whole day. So it's a little bit more better in the school time, but they also have not so. So that was my reflection. The systematical work, have that kind of knowledge so you can work with it continually and together with others. It's some gap we have to struggle with there.
I'm Yuxin. I'm from Taiwan, another country. This is my second time to listen to Professor Sandall's speech, so thank you very much. In Taiwan, we are trying to use the building blocks in some preschool. And some schools, some preschool, they trying to build systems, and they work. I think they have more opportunities to see the children have more engage and participate in the system, in the environment. But as I know, there is also some barriers. For example, therapists, they can come to school, but they don't have enough time, enough frequency to work with teachers in school systems. So they may not have much opportunities to communicate. That's one barrier. And the other is the system support, how the perspective from the manager level or on the whole system, the regulation. I think that's the other barrier that teachers may encounter. Yeah, but it's a very nice model for us to think about how to construct the environment, work together. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you for your lecture. It's very interesting. My name is Jenny and I work here at the department. My reflections are several, but what I would like to say is that I find it a little bit difficult to see how to just use all the best recommended practices that you have compiled, just to take them to the Swedish context. Of course, that's not the point, but still, it's, for me, I think it's we have a system that distributes resources in a specific way, and when I think about inclusion and in preschool, I mean, all Swedish preschools are inclusive as a basic ideology, you could say, but the question is, how inclusive are they in practice? And if children have specific disabilities, for example, how do we include children so that they feel included in the group? And that I'm interested in how that can be focused more in detail. So not just children who have developmental delay or may not be in typical development, but we have a range of children. Some have more identified disabilities. And in that way, I think that the professionals in preschool, a lot of them don't really have the skills to take care of these children in the right way. So I think there's a dilemma in direct support and instruction, and how we see or what attitudes we have to children's development and learning. That goes together with the resources and how they're distributed in Sweden. I don't know if I was very clear, but that was some of my reflections.
I'm Fia Andersson. I'm working here at the department. One of my reflections was that I recognized when many years ago, 1971, when I started as a teacher, we got kids in school, so they were between 10 and 12 when I started. We had a lot of kids in the area where I worked, coming from other countries. We didn't at that time have a subject, Swedish as a second language, and we did not have a subject, mother tongue, which was formed later on. But what you told us here today, so thank you very much for that, for your lecture. What you talked about was how the volunteer, your experiences from the volunteering, from people doing a lot of things without being paid, and how you could collect a lot of information from people not being paid. My experience is that it was like that at the beginning of my period as a teacher. A lot of teachers, a lot of parents, a lot of fritidspedagoger, leisure time teachers and so on. And also preschool teachers. We easily could get groups together and try and discuss what do we need, what do we have, what do we see, and we started to see the possibilities, not only the difficulties. Because the first thing what happened is, well, this is so difficult. How could we teach children from different countries? We don't know their languages. How could we talk to them? How could we do what we should do? And teachers was really scared. They were really scared. But it changed when we started groups in that area when I worked. And we got quite a lot of things that was similar to what you were talking about. And after about, what could it be, 7, 8 years, about 1980, we got a new curriculum. So then it was formulated as 2 subjects, Swedish as a second language, as mother tongue. But what came out of our not paid work was was very important. And it was also recognized when writing the new curriculum. So that was my reflection, that to work a little bit more without that you have, the first thing you ask about is, what can I get for it in money or in time and so on. I think we've come to a point where it's very difficult to do anything without looking at the money. But from research perspective, I think we do quite a lot of research, don't we? Without being paid for it. So I think that we could maybe also get other people involved. So?
Some last reflection before we hand over to... Someone last? I should give one reflection myself. And I reflected on what you said now about free pay. On Friday, I invited some of the most experienced organizational psychologists here in Sweden to talk about cooperation. It's very easy to say, now we should cooperate. It's very easy. No one said, no, we should not cooperate. But what is it? What is it really? And I said, how about come and discuss it? And we ended up that we had one subject, and that is communication. Communication is a building block of cooperation. And they are coming not for free, they are paying. They are paying for coming. And work together with, we are, I don't think we are colleagues. We are colleagues in one way, but we are also fighting for the customers. So it's very interesting. We are paying to contribute to each other. So I hand over to you now, and
both, or just this one, maybe it's enough. Yeah, I think that it was very interesting to listen to Susan and also to hear from you about your thoughts. And some of them I am also a bit, I will try to be optimist, but in the beginning I felt most about what we are not able to do in this field, because I think it's a signal or a sign of a strong professional group doing this work together. As you said, Fia, if you are engaged and strong professionally, you are able to analyze things and also to collaborate. And we are not so strong in this field yet, maybe, but it is something that I would like to do, to gather people and collaborate together, or maybe joining your network and contributing with our perspective, maybe, if you want to have some views from another context, maybe. And then another thing that I also think about is we have not. There are some barriers because our field is very fragmented. There are a lot of agencies that have something to do that are involved, and maybe it's also the reason why the people working in the field are not so strong professionally, because there are a lot of other people deciding or having or leaving them out of the decisions in this field. So this is something that we have to think about in the organization part and leadership of this But also another important issue here is about the values and the attitudes and what people are thinking about, and not just professional, but also the parents and the public in general. I think inclusion in Sweden is not so popular anymore. It's not accepted sometimes. So we have to think about how we can change those attitudes and values, because on one side we are still believing those values in general, but not for everyone, as you said. Inclusion is should be for everyone, not for the most and exclude someone. So I think we have something to do there. And also something that I think is complicating the field is some attitudes or general ideas about the danger of focusing on the individuals, what you are thinking. So we have some barriers there, so we are just allowed to talk about the environment, but not to speak about the characteristics of individuals, because this is a kind of a categorization and so on. So maybe we have some kind of barriers on our way when we want to find a consensus, because this is something that hinder our actions. So I will stop there.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'll just say a few words because, you know, I'm standing between you and the food. So this has actually been very interesting, and I'll just start by saying, you know, when we teach the history of special education and the history of inclusion in our courses in the United States, we often refer to Scandinavia. So it's interesting to sort of hear kind of the current dilemmas and challenges that might be ignored when we are giving our historical background, and those challenges that you talked about are some that we hear, of course, all the time. And while we have fair agreement, some consensus about the importance of inclusion and the having inclusion as a value, especially in early childhood education. We have that as a shared view among our professional organizations, in law, and in general practice. We certainly are in an era where it has unfortunately become more acceptable to respond to difference in a less than positive way, and we're very worried about that. And I won't get political about that, but we're very worried about that. But we do have this shared value among kind of the people who are shaping what happens in everyday life for children. But we face many of the same challenges that you talked about in terms of implementation and the research to practice gap. And there are people who are spending great amounts of time trying to understand that and figure out what to do. A lot of people have jumped on the coaching bandwagon to see if coaching is the ingredient that can change everyday practice. And it's one of many. We're also looking at teacher preparation from the beginning to see if that is could be some of the ways to make a difference. But it's just very, very interesting and very insightful to me to listen to you talk about some of those challenges, even though our systems are different and have sort of grown up differently, that while the challenges have their sort of unique twists, the topic of the challenges is is similar. You know, how do you get teams of people to actually work together when you have different employers with slightly different philosophies or slightly different funding streams or any of those kinds of issues. But I will say that this notion of the tiered levels of support has sort of permeated education in the United States from all grade levels, and that it's being used as a way to approach teaching challenges, whether you're in a preschool classroom or a grade 6 classroom or so forth. So that there are some similarities across the age range there. The United States is kind of competitive, and we're also really focused on outcomes. And so I've listened in various ways to this conversation about focusing on the environment and perhaps less of a focus on, if I'm understanding, less of a focus on individual differences and individualizing in the instruction. I don't know if I have that exactly right, but I will say that in our early childhood programs, historically, there's been a great deal of attention to the learning environment. And in the past 10 years or so, one of the measures that has been used to evaluate the quality of early childhood programs has looked not just at the environment, but at the instructional interactions of teachers and children. So, the United States is competitive. They really pay attention to outcomes, and they really pay attention to the results of evaluations that may or may not result in greater funding or more stars or more points to the program. And that change in the measurement system has resulted in a lot of change in focusing on both the learning environment and the interactions between the teachers and the children.